Welcome to This Week in Heresy, episode 72, Honoring Death, with our guest via phone, Robin Lynn Griffith. Hey Robin, welcome to This Week in Heresy.
Hi Gina.
So for the sake of our audience, can you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Robin Lynn Griffith. You may know me as Ro. I am a spiritual woman, and I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I support End of Life process. I am a doula, which is a midwife. And many people think of midwives as being someone that births the living. And I have found over the course of my life and my spiritual callings that I also help birth the dying. If we think about it, they're going into another place, so kind of a birth of sorts. But it's a calling that it just kind of came to me recently. But I'm a drummer, a fire dancer, a pagan in the pagan community. I'm a mother, a teacher, a planner, a community activist. I do a little bit of everything. So that's who I am.
Excellent. And it's awesome to have you on because actually working with the dying is something that I'm called to as well. And, you know, we just don't talk about death. And it's very exciting to be able to nerd out about death, which sounds really morbid. But
yeah. Well, you know, it's one of those things they say, what is it you should never talk about at parties, right? Well, lately it's kind of been, you know, what was it, sex, drugs, religion, whatever. But if you ever even open your mouth and mention dying, or people ask me what I do and I start to talk with them about being a doula, you see the fear in their eyes. They kind of glaze over, they pull away. You know, working with death and dying in our society right now, it's not an honored place. It's a place that people go to fear right away. So
Right.
it's part of it is helping them understand, you know, not to be afraid. And so anyway, it's a long process, but yeah, good. I'm glad to know that there's someone else out there to advocate for that.
Yeah, because, you know, there's a lot around death that we can do in our, you know, with our partners, with our loved ones, that actually can make the process easier. You know, like having the legal paperwork done before you need it, you know, and
Right. Yeah.
people
Yeah,
just
you
don't
just
want to
said.
think about it. Yeah. And
Well, and there's a couple of really good resources, right? There's the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, I think.
mhm,
There's the Pagan Book of Living and Dying. There's a
fantastic book.
couple. Yeah. And that one is, for me, that's really the one that brought me to the place to understand that. I had very close experiences in my family with death, and a lot of the ritual thing. Even if I have someone that's not anywhere near the alternative community or not anywhere near being religious or spiritual, I talk with them and I teach them about lighting a candle, about the candle lighting. There's a process of lighting a candle and leaving it going. There's a process of lighting a candle and knowing that that's your prayer. There's rituals that we can do in our lives to mark our grief, and I also have done some writing on moving grief out of our bodies, because grief is really a painful thing in our body. When we are in real grief, we actually hurt, and we don't always put the two together. So there's lots of little things in schools that can be shared. And people in my community, and yours too, I'm assuming, understand, you know, how honored death can be. Death is a sacred moment. When I work with people and someone is dying, I've had experiences where they know they're dying, and there's a lot of ramping up before that. Then there's been the experience of the sudden death, and there's many ways to handle that. And you can, when you start to actually work with people and approach people and be with families and friends and things, there's just so many tools you can give them and share with them that can help ease their personal grief. And if you don't deal with personal grief from death and dying, it will stay with you. And I know this from personal experience. It will stay with you and it will deteriorate you. So, you know, in times past, when someone died, the community celebrated, right? They paraded the body for 10 days and they went to all the festivals. And, you know, now someone is passing away. Your mom is sick, your brother. For me, one of my close experiences was my baby brother. And I said to my boss, he's dying. It's going to be any day. I'm not going to be here. he would call me every day. Well, when are you coming to the office to do my expense report? Well, what do you mean you need another few days off? And you can't even get out of bed to put your shoes on. The last thing you think about is going to the office, right? So people expect that, well, they died 2 weeks ago. Aren't you ready to get going again? So there's many levels of grief, and there is no, oh, well, in about a year you'll feel better. Each of us are different. And if you don't have a place to speak or express or any tools at all to help you, it can hang on you and it can eat you, and you may not even know that's what's happening there.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing I don't know if you experience this a lot as a doula, but when the other thing too is on the other side of it, on the clergy side of it, is allowing people to express their grief and then trying to kind of run interference for the other people that are trying to do like the really there's a lot of platitudes that I'm just kind of like, no, please don't say that. No, like everything happens for a reason. And
yeah, there's a lot of cliches that you don't want to hear. And that is one of the things that they teach you right away about being a doula is, stay away from the cliches. And every one of those has value in its own way. Oh, well, this too shall pass, or, it'll go away, or it'll get better. All of that is true in its own way. But when you're in the place of having this grief experience, or being told that someone is dying, or that they're going to die, or they're not going to make it, having someone say, oh, well, they're in a better place, and, all of that, you just kind of look at them like, huh? It doesn't feel appropriate sometimes. But all of those statements actually do have a value in their own way. Yeah, they're in a better place. Yes. And sometimes we say we're jealous because they're in a better place. But yeah, that is one of the things that we are trained and taught. Now, I will tell you that there is no certification program that's official through any government or ruling body about being a doula as it relates to end of life and death and dying. And even being midwife doula. There are no real laws or rules regarding it because it's really a new place in the world. And so, there's a lot of training places out there. I've worked with several different types of trainers. I'm very fortunate because having had personal experiences and being a Wiccan, I'm open to death. I'm open to all of that. There's a lot of places where they want to get, sure, pay us $5,000, do your online training, and come to our location twice a year for more training. There's a lot of that kind of thing that goes on out there. It feels very shystery. Not to say that those programs aren't valid or those people don't have their hearts in the right place, but it took me a while to find a place and a way to really feel comfortable learning what I was learning. And I think I'm a little more fortunate because coming from the background I'm coming from, I'm more open to, wow, I think I just saw their ghost go down the hallway. Yeah, you probably did, kind of thing. So you have to kind of be careful because while there's not any real certificate, it's not like being an RN when you go somewhere and this is what you're doing and there's a board of nurses somewhere or something like that. So, a lot of times I've had people try to invalidate what I do because it's not coming from a formal, there's no board of doulas or what, and I just don't buy it. I don't buy it because I know what my calling is from my spirit, right? And it's a deep process, as we were talking about before. It's a process of hearing people, letting them know they're heard, whether that's during a dying process or whether it's after. So it can be really deep. It can be really super deep, or it can be as simple as, I'm here at your house for the hour that we agreed upon once a week for right now. There's nobody around. You need to run an errand. I'll unload the dishwasher for you. I'm here. It can also be a friend is dying in our community and nobody can get to the hospital. And I jump in my car and I go there. And I sing songs and I sing the community songs and I hold the hands and I hold the hands of the family. And I always tell people, you can do this, you can do this. It's a very sacred thing. I try to help people understand this is a very sacred moment. Yes, they're going to die, and yes, you're going to hurt, and yes, you're here. Funerals are for the living, they say. But it's a sacred thing. It's so super sacred. When we're born, when everybody celebrates and everybody's there, and then when you're dying, I just breaks my heart when I know of people that are dying alone, or dying in an ER, or dying in a hospital bed, and nobody wants to go see them because nobody wants to be around them. They might be dying, or they're sick, or it's hard for us, or it's a matter of helping people to understand. Yeah, it's very hard for you, and I think part of what makes it hard for us is we are afraid. We don't learn in our culture about death and dying. We don't. There's so many conflicting things. Is there a heaven? Is there a hell? Where do you go? Is it the Summerland? Is it the doggy rainbow? I mean, in primitive cultures, the little toddler participated in the body going all over the village. You grew up understanding that this was just a normal part of the whole process. And in our culture and society today, we hide that. Yeah, your mom died. You got 3 days off for the funeral. Why aren't you back at your desk?
Right.
And it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, well, our society is really focused on, longevity and eternal youth, and I've always, it's always seemed strange to me, I've always really embraced getting older. Just, I don't know, maybe it's just my Capricorn nature, but.
Practical, yes, yeah.
Yeah. But, we have some reverence for getting older and the people who are old, because they're like, wow, you're really old, but we don't, we try to banish getting old and banish anything that has to do with getting old. So like looking at something about, really talking about dying or thinking about dying, it's just like, oh my God. And it's that fear. And I think you're absolutely right. It's easier for people to push things aside than to really look at it head on.
Right. And that's true, because with a lot of things in our lives and the world around us, if we look at that, then we have to look at something else. And that thing about, we're always growing and learning. Yeah, we are always growing and learning. It's just some of the things that we grow and learn about are harder than others, right? So, and grief is a real thing, and it's okay to grieve. I really practice and tell people, and I hate to use the word preach, but grieve. My gosh, grieve. Grief sometimes reaches up from the ground and grabs me by the gut and pulls me down on all fours, and I'm crying and spittle and snot, and and there's no consoling me, and I think that's really healthy. I mean, true, if you're really having these going on and on, maybe you want to find someone to talk to. I mean, it's not my place to say don't go to a medical doctor, but try to acknowledge that you're having this grief. Yeah, go see a medical doctor. But I think if you allow yourself that time, if you allow that this is happening, that you're going to see people that have passed walking down the street. Oh, look, that looks like them. Oh my gosh, your breath catches in your throat. I mean, if you just allow yourself to have those moments, I think that facilitates more healing than paying big bucks to see a doctor who gives you sleeping pills at night kind of thing, right? And we all handle our depressions and our anxieties differently. For me, when I get in a bad space and I might find myself not able to sleep, I paint, I watercolor, or I clean my house. And then you can kind of tell sometimes when I'm in a funk because my house is really clean.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the things I try to do when I'm doing my death work is that, I try to really make it clear to the people that are left is like, listen, you're going to grieve and it's going to suck. But, you will eventually get through, but don't let anybody tell you that you can't grieve and that it'll take as long as it takes. It'll take time.
Well, and that's true. They give you this, this is the continuum right there, the little circle, right? Acceptance, denial, action, and that's all true. But, there's no time on that, right? There's no time limit on that. And And I think sometimes the more you work with that, the more you find out about yourself, the more you find out about other people. The practical side of dying is, yeah, we should all have a paper somewhere that says, here's my bank account, here's my information. As many times as I've supported that process with other people, well, I still don't have anything like that for myself.
Right.
In a position to heal myself, I can give you all the good words. I don't know that I've ever really taken care of it myself, but yeah. So I had a gentleman, a very dear friend of mine, who was passing away from brain cancer, and that's a hard one because they kind of lose some cognitive towards in there, and he and I spent some time talking about the fact that he was seeing figures in his room already. And the hospice people are there, and hospice and palliative care. Now, palliative care, kind of people think, oh, they're going to die in a second. Palliative care, not necessarily true. Palliative care can also be used when there's a very serious illness, and that may go on for a while. Hospice and palliative care and end of life support all go hand in hand. I'm not a nurse, so when there's a need for nursing, we call on the hospice folks, right? And when there's a need for meds, we call on the palliative care people. I support a client, friends, family, their community. I support all of that, to say to them, what you're doing is okay, Okay, let's talk about the practical stuff. Have you done a will? Is there an attorney? Does your mom know your information? There's just certain ways to handle it. There are certain things that happen, There's certain things that happen with the body. There's, are you going to be buried? Are you going to have cremation? There's just, and when, I've been there when Neptune arrives to remove someone's physical shell, I really believe that as we're passing, our soul is still lingering, and I try to honor that. I try to teach some of that. I even use art and painting and coloring, as a part of the whole process. I do a monthly 1 hour where I light candles on my altar, and the candles are for different people. They're not just for me. And it's my way of at least holding space for those souls. And I do, for a while there, I was having a little bit of a monthly gathering of art stuff, using art as therapy. There's lots of ways that, all of that can be supportive. The before, the during, the after. And so, and acknowledging them, right? How do we memorialize someone, How do you memorialize someone who wants their ashes in the ocean? What do you do? How can you do this? Some resources local here to the Bay Area, but there's ways you can do that, right? You can put a plaque somewhere. I have a memorial bench for my younger brother in the city of Santa Cruz, in the city of Los Gatos. Los Gatos did a really good job. They had a program where you could basically buy a bench, and they would put it on the corner, and it has a little plaque on it, right? So, whether you go to the graveyard, whether you just, talk to them at night, you hear stories of people that have running conversations with folks that have gone on. I really believe in that. I have a series of things that happen for me about my younger brother. When I see numbers like it's 1234, 1234, I know that's my brother reaching out to me. And I don't let anyone, knock that down or denigrate, what I'm saying there. I hold on to those things for myself.
Yeah, I mean, I do that too, and it's one of it's actually an interesting thing in my mom's side of the family. We do a lot of that around my grandparents because they used to garden. So like every time I see a hummingbird here, because there's not, cause, that reminds me of my meme. And if I see a cardinal on the East Coast, it's the same thing. Because cardinals aren't very plentiful in California. But
yeah, we don't see cardinals as red cardinals in California. That's true. Yeah.
No. But there's a lot of little things that will remind me of the people that I love. Like the first death I ever witnessed was my great aunt Frances anyway. And she was an amazing woman. She was in the Women's Army Corps, and we always talked all the time. She was my favorite aunt. And, you know, when I went there, what was really amazing is that we all kind of came together for her death. And, you know, even though, you know, we all felt her passing differently and we all kind of saw things differently, you know, like I saw the goddess come and look at her and take her away,
Yeah.
to a light where the ancestors were. But what was really interesting about the whole thing is that, you know, the whole family was around her praying, and everybody felt that love and peace and contentedness
Yes.
as she passed. And it was amazing because we all felt that similarly, even though we all saw it through different lenses.
Yes.
And it was interesting to me, like afterwards at the funeral, like everybody who had been at her passing was just like kind of blasé at the funeral, like we know she's in a good place, we know she's in heaven, what are we doing here? You know?
Yes. 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 Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you know, the thing about people, and now I understand so much more, of course, because of experience and time. But my stepfather passed away, and his wife wouldn't let us have any of his possessions. Well, my dear friend, who I told people was my fiance towards the end of his life, because I needed to be able to get in to help him. But um, I didn't. I had to clean this house out, and I had that moment of I couldn't do it. I couldn't let those things go. And then I began to understand where my stepfather, you know, where this was coming from his new wife, that she couldn't let these things go. We get caught up in the here and now, right? You hear stories of people, families fighting or this or that or whatever. And, you know, I began to understand why she couldn't give up that last box of precious treasures, you know. And so those are the kind of things that, you know, depending on your maturity personally and your maturity spiritually, you handle them in different ways. You either are angry, you know, that you know, bleepity bleep woman won't give me daddy's medals, and, you know, what about this and what about that? And now I can look and I can say, I understand why it took her more than a year to get those things to me, because it was hard for her to let them go. My whole thing in our world, and you know, it's, we need to get back to the rituals. We need to get back to the teaching. We need to get back to the opening. And no matter what your belief is about where you're going when you're dying, or, you know, or where you go when you're dead or whatever, you know, we need to get back to opening that back up. We need to go back to talking about it. We need to go back to teaching about it. You know, show the children, be there at the death. I know a nurse, I know several nurses, and they have told me that even in a hospital scenario, people don't want to deal with the death and dying. That there, you know, a lot of times there'll be only one person that will be the one that cleans up the body, or you know, that there's nobody there, or the family comes and comes and comes and comes, and then, you know, they're going to die any moment, and there's only like two of them there, or people that passed away alone. And, you know, I just have issues with all of that. You
Yeah, you
know?
know, actually, I was a participant in a program. You may have heard of it, but at Kaiser Santa Clara, they have a volunteer program called No One Dies Alone, and I was involved with that for a couple of years. And
I think I remember that
basically,
was Kaiser. I thought that was okay. Go ahead.
well,
Okay.
it's at different hospitals actually in the area. So the one I was at Kaiser Santa Clara,
Um.
and
Mm,
and basically it's a bunch of volunteer outside people and nurses and
mm,
doctors and stuff that will sit with people for, you know, like it's on a rotation, so like it's like 4 hours at a time, but they
right.
have someone that will sit with somebody, especially if they have little to no family.
Right.
So you know, you sit there and you hold space for this person. And actually an
Right.
interesting note, when you're talking about the candles, when I first started volunteering with them, I suggested actually using a small electric candle, and like each person got their own little electric candle, and you put that in the room with them to signal
Right.
that this is somebody who is passing. And
Well, that's really nice. That's beautiful, actually. For you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
everybody really loved it. But it was an amazing program because I learned a lot about holding space for the
Right.
dying, and just how, like you were saying, how people just kind of aren't there for
Right.
someone who is passing. I mean,
Right.
and and the nursing
Well,
staff
and
can only do so much too, right?
right. Right. Well, you know, it's gosh, when my stepfather was dying, he was in an ICU, and we knew we were going to be removing him from life support. And one of the things that I really appreciated, that really surprised me, was when they do that in this particular hospital in the ICU unit, everyone stands up, everyone stops what they're doing, and everyone stands and waits for the moment, and it marks that moment, and then they go back to what they're doing. And that I just was, wow, that was so touching, so very touching, and actually very strengthening, because it wasn't just another day at the office for the nurses. They knew something was happening here, and they were acknowledging it, and that's part of it's a big service to humanity to support the process of death and dying. And so to know, that there's these programs, that there's volunteers, that there's people to hold space, that's a big, it's a big step. It's really hard to support end of life processes, again, because people are afraid and people don't want to talk about it, and it kind of wants to be shoved under the carpet nowadays. But when you are a part of that as a volunteer, and the service that I do, I'd love to be able to be paid for my passion. Right now, I don't really get paid a lot for my passion. That's okay. I'm okay with all of that. It's a sacred moment. I consider it an honor. But, it's a big service to humanity. And a lot of times in the role of doula or end of life support, doula for the death and dying. And it's hard to say that, I'm a doula. I'm a doula for death and dying. I'm a doula for end of life support. First of all, what is a doula? But people kind of try to knock that down a little bit, right? And I don't let them hurt me in that way. And I think part of it is because they just don't understand it. And again, we have the fear in society. We don't talk about it, and especially not in this country as much as perhaps some of the other countries might. But yeah, it's a big service to humanity. I really feel like it's important, and it's something that I give, and it took me a little while to embrace it as a calling. It took me a little while to realize that, my first encounters with the Dark Mother as a young Wiccan were scary, right? Who is this person that's buried in the depths of the earth, whose arms you return to? What is this, guys? What is this energy? Why am I afraid? What does this mean for me? If you go back and look at, the Descent of Inanna, and, there's just so many ways that you can start to teach yourself and start to embrace some of that without the fear. I had a group of women. We did kind of like a shamanic journey, and there was some people that were there that were the drummers, and we did this descent, and we did other things, and we had drummers there, and they called us back, and they secured us. And as a spiritual person, and especially as someone in an alternative, if you're doing any shamanic work or any kind of, you start to learn, what are your safety things, right? How do you explore this in a safe manner?
Right.
Having
How do you
people there to
take
make
care of
sure you
yourself?
come. Yeah, how do you take care of yourself? If you've seen anyone doing any trancing or any, calling down of the goddess work or any of this kind of, that you have to be there for them afterwards. Food, water, touching, call them back, kind of thing. So there's a little bit of that happens for me when I'm in that space and place. I have to really, really, really remember not to bring that home, not to hold that in my heart, but to let that just be a part of an overall process.
Absolutely. It's hard for the family. It's hard for the person dying. It's work for the person dying as well, but it is just as much work for the people who are doing caretaking and the support. So, being a doula or being like myself as a clergy person, it's I've had to learn how to You know, how do I take care of myself afterwards? How do I cleanse myself afterwards? How do I disconnect from all the emotions of the
Yeah.
time? How do I make sure that my stuff stays my stuff and their stuff stays their stuff?
Right.
You know,
Right. And
and
especially if you have any kind of impact in you at all, it's like you just get hit by this
me,
stuff, right? So,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, because
Yeah.
when I was doing the stuff with No One Dies Alone, there was a few times where some of the spirits actually came to visit me. I mean, I'd only visited them, but when they died, they actually
Right.
came to visit
Right.
me. And it's like, no, you
Right.
have to
Right.
move on now.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
cannot
That's
stay
how
in
I
my
am too.
house.
I'm like a kid. When I see dead people, I see dead people too, but I don't do medium work because I don't want to open myself up for something inside of me that's not me or doesn't come from spirit. But I'm the same way. I have had working with someone and tuning in on someone that's been tragic accidents and kind of relaying a message. And my whole thing is, here's the message, but you got to go. You got to keep going. You can't stay here with me. So yeah, and it's just really, it's different depths. If you have any calling inside of you to support the process, I recommend, like you suggested, volunteer at a hospital, get in touch with some hospice folks. Here in the Bay Area, we have several organizations. Pathways, I think, is one. There's a couple others. Volunteer for them. Do some of that work. Do some reading. Pick up the Tibetan book of living and dying. What is the name of the pagan book?
Yeah.
The the pagan
It's
book.
Pagan Book of Living and Dying, and that's a fantastic book.
Yeah, and get that book. If there's any calling in you at all for anything like that, then I recommend that you start reaching out and doing some learning on your own. If you're like me, where you got to the point where you wanted something more official, in my time of looking to find information, I found hospitals and nursing programs and this and that. I mean, there's formal programs, but it's like, okay, this is done out of the Loma Linda Sisters of Charity in Wisconsin, So I mean, and then I've come across a couple of end of life and quality of life kind of things that I felt were better programs that I've done more formal training. You do the work, you do the lesson work, you delve inside of yourself a little bit, you get some tools, you get some skills, and you just share. And like I had mentioned earlier, I was reading an article that talked about just reaching out and soft, loving eye and eye to eye, and a hand in a hand and a nod. Those kind of things go so much further than, well, here's the process and here's how we do it. And it's just kind of, there's a way. It's a connection. It's a place. It's a space, and it's a connection. And my family. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, like, what we were taught in the No One Dies Alone program, and actually I was also taught in seminary. It's like there's also presence. You're just being there, being a calm, comforting presence for
and no
everybody.
judging. Right, you're coming from a place of no judgment.
Exactly.
I don't care if you cry and you have boogers on your face. I don't care if you don't
Here's
cry.
a tissue, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't care if you don't cry. I don't. It's like it's just. Yeah, so the presence, just being present, just being there. You might start out with a plan of action, and things change. Be flexible. So it's just really when you and I were first connecting, we're talking about things on the fringes, and I said, I'm working with death and dying, and I really feel like that's the fringes right now. Of course, being in our pagan community, we're more open to that. I had told one of my friends, and I'll say it to you too. When I go, I want to have a big ass fire. I want a big old fire. I want drummers. I want torches. I want bombs. I don't want, bring it all in. Come to the hospital. I mean, or come to my home or whatever I want. But So if you have any kind of a calling, start researching that, start accepting that. I got to a place in space where I had to say, this is who I am. This is what I support. My family said to me, oh, don't do that. the grief is so strong, you don't need all that extra grief. Don't do that. No, you don't get it. One, I don't hold it that way in my heart, in my body. But, and two, it's like this is my calling. This is what I'm doing. This is what Spirit has given me. This is what Father, Mother, God, the Goddess, whatever, whomever it is, this is where my place and space has come to in my life. And I'm getting at the 50 mark. I am understanding more. My friends are elderly. I have the young ones coming behind me, but I'm in place and space where I can say, no, it's okay, Mom. I can do this, and I'll be okay. So my family was just concerned that was I going to be swallowed by others' grief. And if you find that you are kind of having those experiences, then maybe that's not the role for you. Maybe there's another way you can support that. I'm just an advocate of let's bring it out from underneath the covers. Let's bring the little children into the ICU, into the hospital. You can't go into ICU if you're under 14. And you've had the hospital experiences yourself, so you know what it's like to be there. And you can't go there, or you can't do this. And if someone is fortunate enough to, and I say fortunate, to go home to die, right? Then there's more flexibility there. I always cringe when I am aware of someone that technically could go home, but the family doesn't want them to, or I know of someone who they said, okay, well, we're going to put you in this rehab home, but everybody knew they were going to be dying, and they put them in like this rehab home, and they called it the comfort room, and it was no different than any other little old folks home, and and I was there, and I'm like, how is this a comfort room, and this, and so, yeah, I just feel like there's so much work that we need to do in this place and space, and I do really, it's really sacred, and it's really an honor, and it's okay if you cry, and it's okay if you're afraid, and it's okay if you don't understand, and there's the mind, body, soul thing. What's the mind? Okay, where's your paperwork? Have you had a chance to do anything with your paperwork? Do we have your email passwords? Stuff like that. And there's the body thing. How can we be comfortable? We're in the hospital. All the sounds and noises make everyone else uncomfortable. You're at home. You're in your own bed. You're in your own place. How can you, just all of that, right? Just all of that just really comes.
And then what do you do what do you want to do with your body afterwards, And right, I think this is something where people really get freaked out about, because I guess, one of the things reading, because I did a paper about death and dying, and, using the Pagan Book of Living and Dying and some other resources. And what people really don't realize is that you don't have to go get embalmed. You don't have to even have a funeral in a nursing home, in a funeral home. You can do it any way you want, and you can specify that in your will. So, like, if you're freaked out about being buried, you can be cremated, or you could be, some other way.
Right, and like you said, when you do your paperwork, it's like, even if you haven't done any paperwork afterwards, when they're like, okay, well, Neptune's taking the body, and then here's this ashes, and you're filling out the form, and you're saying, I'm going to do blah, blah, blah. And then I had called because there had been some changes on someone, and they said, oh, well, you have to submit another form to tell us that you're not doing this, you're going to do this instead. And, and it's kind of like, more bureaucracy, really? I have to give you a form to say that we didn't put the ashes in the backyard, we went to the ocean instead? I mean, I'm all for our rules and regulations and our laws, and I know there's a place for all of that, but sometimes it's like, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming for the people in grief. It's overwhelming for the, and I got a couple boxes of ashes hanging out in my closet, right? And every now and then I say, oh, hey, how's it going? Kind of thing. So, yeah. So mind, body, and soul. How do we deal with all of that? How do we? And for me, everything is okay. Everything is good. If this is what you want, this is where you are. It's all good. I am not judging you. I don't own that. All I'm doing is marking a sacred moment, and it really is an honor
Yeah. And I
Go
think
ahead.
that's the most important part, is to really respect the dying person's wishes. Like, I
Right.
know there's one thing that I tell my students a lot in my coven is like, if somebody asks you to be there and they're dying, you go.
Yes.
Because you
Right.
don't know if you're going to miss something super important. One of the other things I tell
Yes.
people is that, you know, my ex coven leader was pretty horrible to me and not a very nice person. But even if he was dying and asked me to come and see him, I would go. It wouldn't be pleasant. I wouldn't really
Right.
care for it. But I also tell people, I'm like, listen, you know, if you're mad at somebody, or if somebody was really horrible to you, you are not obligated to go to anything around their death if you don't want to.
Right. And that's true. You know, and you shouldn't you shouldn't own any of that, right? Because, you know, those are deeper issues. Those are, and, you know, you have the right, and you're in an okay space to say, I don't want to see that person. You know, they were horrible to me in life, and, you know, they're asking for everybody to come to them, and I feel like it's another power play, and I'm not going to do that. You know, that's an okay space if that's really where you are, right? I mean, there's so much. It's so easy for people to really dump on you around death and dying. You know, that's when you hear the horrible stories about families' behaviors, right? Weddings and funerals, death and dying,
Yeah.
fighting over the
Yeah.
trinkets. You know,
Yeah.
and my godmother passed away, and I was there in her home, and, you know, and people that I knew as family of hers that in all of my living years, I had never seen or heard from them once in her space and place. We're suddenly
Right.
all there and wanted to clean out her house. Yeah, right. You know, I
Oh,
mean,
jeez.
so you kind of have to.
Hmm.
But yeah, so when you're called, it's a tough choice, and I don't think that anyone should be. I don't think anybody should be judged for the choices they make in that regard.
Yeah. Well, I guess to be more clear about it, you know, I would suggest that people should go if they're asked, but they don't
Yes,
have to. They don't have to.
yes, yeah. I would suggest they go also, because there's a healing that's happening there. There's
Hmm.
a healing of sorts that's happening there. And it's unfortunate, you know, you see that little thing sometimes, emails or Facebook memes or whatever that say, you know, when you're on your deathbed, are you going to say, gee, I'm sorry I didn't spend more time at the office? You know, probably not,
Right.
right? You know,
Right.
so, you know, if you're asked to come for something like that, go, because there's healing happening there. And, you know, spirit is just amazing, and we don't want to hold anyone to us on this plane, but, you know, there's a healing that happens there, and whether that's obvious at that moment or whether it comes later in your realization, you know, so be it. But definitely, when you're called to do this work, you know, even if it's just to show up for someone, do it, because there's a healing that's happening there. Yeah, you know. And, you know, we're fortunate. I'm in a fire community, right? We have, you know, stay up all night and dance. I'm a fire dancer. I dance wildly around a bonfire all night, right? We have songs we sing. We have chants that we sing. We have community songs that we sing. And I had the opportunity to hold the hand of James the Druid as he was getting ready to pass. Not at that moment, he passed the next day, but I held his hand and I sang the songs, and he went from a place of unconsciousness to a place of, oh, you know, and he knew the songs I was singing, and he knew, and someone laughed at me later and said, you know, when we see you coming, it's like, uh-oh, you know, kind of thing. So but, you know, there's traditions, there's ways, and of course, his family was like, okay, you know, this person kind of thing, but I didn't really care. I just held his hand and sang the songs. And Wendy Rule had a workshop, the songs of the psychopaths, and, you know, there's traditions that we have. There's ways we can honor, you know, that you can. And I got in my car and I went. Right, nobody from my community could be there at that moment, and I got in my car and I went, and I heard from people I hadn't heard from in a long time. You know, what's the story? Is this really true? Is this happening? And, you know, when my brother was dying, I was really angry. I was like, you know, get up out of that damn hospital bed and get on with your life, I mean,
Right, right.
so there, there's a bunch of different things that happen to you, and it's really a matter of, am I the priestess today, or am I the sister, or the friend, or the daughter? Well, who am I at this moment? And if I'm the priestess, then stand up straight and chin up. And if I'm the daughter, it's okay to cry. And if I'm the friend, oh well, I'm sorry you don't know my songs, but I'm singing them anyway.
Right.
So
Well,
yeah, it's been an amazing journey. You just, it's like, okay, I was afraid of you, Dark Mother. Why me?
right. I went through that too, because, for me, Samhain is a really big deal, and it's a
Yes,
very
yes,
big holiday for me. And, I want to have that memorial for people, because there's not a lot of that kind of stuff, especially in the US.
right,
And it's interesting because, it's such a big deal for me, and that it's such a service for me to do,
yes,
that not having it is really strange.
right,
And I think
yeah,
it's a really fantastic, it's a very fantastic time of year just to be open about our grief, and to be
right,
with other people and really honor the people that have passed. And,
right.
I
Well, if
really
you go
wish.
somewhere that has, like the little Spanish, there's a little Mexican restaurant, a little
Mm,
Oaxacan Mexican restaurant that I go to sometimes, and they do a huge altar for the Day of the Dead, and they
mm-hmm.
invite their customers to bring pictures to put on their altar. And
Yeah.
I always do it every year, and I look down at these other spaces, and and I know that each one of these are a string, right, of eternity,
Mm-hmm.
past, present, and future, and I just silently acknowledge all of these people that were brave enough to bring out their pictures in a public scenario.
Right. I think that's the one thing we really need to reclaim. And I know we were kind of hitting on this before, or a little earlier, is, being public about our grief, and sharing the grief in community.
Yeah.
And I think that's something we really, really need to reclaim, because there's a lot of traditions where there's, you have people, even professional wailers, like people who will wail the grief for you.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, and if you look at it like countries where after so many years, they go and they dig up the bones, and they take out the bones, and they feast with the bones, and then they put them
Hmm.
back in the ground. We
Right.
don't do that. We put you in the ground and we go away and we come over every 10 years, kind of thing.
Right, right.
And you're embalmed, and God knows what you would look like, really, I mean,
Yeah.
and, I've also spoke with a lot of morticians, and, you'd be surprised at the things they do to make someone look beautiful in a casket, right? So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so there's, and even if someone is sharing their grief in community, and, it's like I've been in places where someone's sharing grief, and it's like, oh, brother, here we go again,
Right.
and it's hard. It can be hard. And I think when people have those kind of reactions, it's because, again, it goes back to the fear thing. But when
Mm-hmm.
you're sharing your grief in community, if someone's sharing grief in community, try to be present for that. Try to
Right.
honor some of that. I mean, again, I think it relates to personal maturity and spiritual maturity.
Yeah. I tend to get kind of mother bear around that, because if somebody's really openly going, oh God, and really
Yeah,
being a real pain in the butt, I'd be like, leave the room right now. You're not
yeah,
doing
yeah,
anybody any good. Go away.
yeah. Yeah, that's kind of my first reaction to it. And then later I'm like, oh my gosh, maybe I should go check in and see what they have going on. Yeah, I'm the
Right,
same way.
right.
I want to save the
Yeah.
world. And
Yeah.
my whole thing is, yeah, really, I want to save the world. It just breaks my heart. I mean, things, as a magic woman, it's been really hard for me. I was really grateful to find Wicca and find the community, because there were so many
Mm-hmm.
times and places in my life when I was younger when I didn't understand, why am I filled with sadness? Why do I have a melancholy? Why am I feeling this? And, it's that collective thing, right? It's that I woke up the other day and I was super melancholy the night before and crying, and I was just kind of going with it. And what does this mean? And, then
Right.
the next day was the anniversary of the Challenger, and I was, oh,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, so
Yep. I did the
it's
same
just
thing
kind
too. And
of,
I had the same thing too. It's like, what the heck is going on? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I have to really shield and guard myself against that kind of the wave of carrying everyone else's grief with me. And, and that's a part of learning to do these roles, right? Is, how do we take care of ourselves, like we talked about before?
Exactly. And the one thing I'm finding very interesting is especially about public grief, is that the internet both facilitates people being able to publicly grieve for people, but also can be too much at any given time. Like when David Bowie passed away, it was just like amazing to see everybody coming together and being like, wow, this is what David Bowie meant to me, and this and that and the other. But then after a while it got too much. Like the same thing happened to me around 9/11 too, like there was that collective grief and we were all talking with each other about it. But then for me, after a while, it was just like I actually literally sold my TV set to take care of myself.
Yeah. We have our limits too, because we are indeed human beings in a shell of a body on this plane of existence at the moment, right? So we have real physical limits. I mean, whether you believe in the law of gravity or not, it's still there. If you walk up the end of the building and say, I don't believe in the law of gravity, you're still going to go splat at the end of the building. Right. So there are some things, in the world that are just there. You just have to, but yeah. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. It's really good to talk with someone else that has a similar experience. It's very hard to find people to talk with about, like I said, sometimes they see me coming and they're like, uh-oh,
Yeah.
Uh-oh, what's she here for,
Yeah. I totally understand. Well, I'm glad to have you on. And if people would want to get in touch with you to talk about being a doula for the dying and other and other topics that we talked about during the episode, what is the best way to get in touch with you?
I think the best way is really through email. And it would be robinlynn.griffith, Griffith. So again, Robin, ROBIN, Lynn, LYNN, .griffith @gmail.com. And, even if it's just, because I do some coaching too, right? I do some grief coaching. I'm working on a book. It's 21 Tips for Moving Grief. We carry grief with us. Sure, your mother died 5 years ago. If you're still having grief issues, then, let's talk. Let's find some ways to help move that out of your body. Let's find some ways to help you feel better personally. So I'm open for anything, really, right? Any way that I can be of service, and so that's how you can get a hold of me, is through email.
All right. Well, we'll have that all in the show notes, and thank you so much for being on.
Oh, you're quite welcome, and thank you for the opportunity. You have a great day.
I'd like to thank Robin for joining us on This Week in Heresy. You can subscribe to This Week in Heresy via iTunes, the Stitcher app, or the podcatcher of your choice. You can also financially support this podcast through patreon.com. Thank you very much for listening, and if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave me a message through Twitter @TWIH Podcast or on thisweekinheresy.com.